It's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote this morning, Ann Davidson. She's the Chief Security Officer of Oracle. As a day job, that's what she does, and she has, in her past, had various positions, also the government. She's actually, and I need to read this off here, she's part of the Center for Strategic and International Studies Cyber Commission for the 44th President. But how I got to know her is not really necessarily in the security community, but on a surfboard. Ann is an avid surfer, and whenever she comes out to California, you will most likely see her riding the waves somewhere and not somewhere in an office out there. As soon as the AV works here. Exactly. Right.
Thank you, and I just do want to give you the surf report. We're not missing anything back in California. It's terrible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about assurance and governance. And some of you who may have heard me speak before, I do tend to talk about assurance. My remit at Oracle actually is in operational security. We have plenty of other wonderful, capable people who look after our networks. But it's product focused because obviously Oracle is an extremely large and getting larger all the time a software vendor, now also hardware with Sun. And effectively, if security, as all of you know, I'm preaching to the converted, is not engineered into your products, you don't really have a snowball's chance in hell of securing it ex post facto, but also we run our business on our software. So I'm focused primarily on product security. And most of that initially was is and still on assurance, but as we've gotten to be a bigger company, this construct of having a more formal and consistent approach to assurance across our lines of business has become very important. So that's pretty much what I'm going to talk about. So, you know, why, it's something we don't actually think about necessarily directly, but software vulnerabilities actually can affect what we think of as more the traditional governance structure. How do you show you're in compliance with regulatory requirements, for example? And particularly software vulnerabilities can damage your IT structure, your reputation, the amount of money you would spend fixing it. We had a little discussion at breakfast this morning about one of the things that's kind of disturbing to me as a vendor. There are a number of people who like to give talks on how the economic model is flawed, that no one's incented to build good software. And I really think that's kind of not really very true for a lot of reasons. First of all, most of the large vendors run their own businesses on their own software. So if you didn't do a very good job, you're going to pay for it yourself directly because your IT department is going to have to be fixing your own software because you didn't do a good job building it. And second of all, it's also process manufacturing. So most people know from process manufacturing, if you have any economic sense at all, you look at, well, what does it cost us to remediate defects after we ship product? Well, I have to put out a bunch of patches, and I have to take scarce engineering resources I could be using on building new features that I could charge for, instead fixing old stuff, which I don't get to charge for. So that's an opportunity cost of those resources, not to mention the amount of money you spend fixing your own engineering, your own IT structure. So it can actually be a very significant cost if you didn't develop your software with any type of assurance in mind. But also to the degree that vulnerabilities are exploitable, it affects your actual governance, such as someone could corrupt your own systems internally, misuse the software to do things that your policies don't otherwise allow, make it so that the people who did that can vanish. There is an insider threat, and it can actually put you out of compliance with particular laws. And as I mentioned, there is a special consideration for software vendors and probably hardware vendors as well, because it's not just what you build, it's what you're running your businesses on. And you know, in ways that we didn't even think about. So for example, you know, we build ERP systems, we run our own business on our ERP systems, but all those other structures that you use even to build the software are also software based. So for example, the source control system. Well, why does that matter? Because if you didn't, you know, if those systems aren't patched, they aren't maintained, they weren't built robustly, someone in the worst case could walk off with your core intellectual property. That would be bad. And thus put your core intellectual property at risk. The ripple effect of software as a service. And what do I mean by that? Everybody, the new hot thing, I guess, is cloud. And most of us understand the value of service offerings. You can pay people to do things that you don't have the expertise to do for yourself, and it might be cheaper and better for them to do it. The difficulty, or one of the difficulties with software as a service, is multi-tenancy. What do I mean by that? And as I tell developers when I'm talking to them about why engineering, building software correctly is important, bad is if there's a defect in our software and a customer's systems get breached. Worse is there's a defect in our software and a customer's system gets breached while we're hosting it for them. Worst of all possible worlds. Defect in software, not only one customer's system gets breached, but multiple because it's multi-tenancy. So the great jumping off point where people have go from concern about assurance to, oh my God, about assurance is multi-tenancy. So if you didn't get it right, the chickens truly come home to roost in a very bad way in that particular in a software as a service where we're trying to have multiple tenants in the same instance. Defect management is obviously a sensitive area because we all know that you can't, no one really wants, in an ironic way, wants to be known as the people who really fix security defects well. So in a weird way, as a vendor, you don't want to get too good at bug handling and vulnerability remediation. And yet, if you don't do it properly, and everyone does have bugs, and some of them are security bugs, that is the thing that will get you in trouble the fastest in a lot of ways, because you didn't fix something properly, or because you sat on something for 3 years and didn't fix it and it turned out to be serious. So it has a significant impact on customers if you don't do that correctly. And in particular, as more and more businesses become regulated, the burden of that comes back on you as a supplier to not only do more in terms of engineering your software, to be more Johnny on the spot if you have to correct something, because it will put one of your customers out of compliance. So what has Oracle's goals been? I'm really happy to say that one of the things that isn't unusual anymore is that almost all the large vendors that you deal with have some sort of assurance program. That's one of the things that's changed in the last few years. And I talked about the people who talk about economic models don't favor building good software. I don't actually agree with that. And I got so kind of tired of listening to that argument that I think the last time I spoke, which was at a assurance forum, I got up and said, contrary to popular belief, there is no actual evil vendor cabal by which vendors sit around and think about how they can build crummy software, charge more for it, and leave their customers' systems at greater risk longer. That really doesn't happen. In fact, quite the contrary, that certainly the large vendors, and I think more small ones, actually do focus on how can we do better. It doesn't make us perfect. No one will stand up and say we're perfect. But our goals have been, in particular my goals for my group have been, I don't want to be the big empire in Oracle because it's not effective. Hiring more and more policemen is not necessarily going to make our developers do things better. I don't want to be the code cops. But what I do want to do is make it easy for them to do the right thing, meaning tools, training, processes. That doesn't mean, by the way, that there aren't recalcitrant individuals who don't occasionally think it's not important. But if you create an environment where management believes it's important, it's reinforced, you make it easy for people to do the right thing, I think most developers will do the right thing, particularly when you have other incentives in place. And what does that mean? One of the discussions I had at breakfast, someone was asking me about, how do we do things in QA? I said, well, we do have groups in Oracle. We don't have one QA group because we have such a large, so many lines of business. But one of the things that we do, there's a group called, they're groups of individuals who just fix defects. Many organizations operate that way. But when it comes to security defects, we have the original developers go back and fix it. So why do you do that? Well, it's not per se to be punitive. It's not like, oh, you screwed it up the first time, I'm going to make you pay. But we want developers to understand the impact of their actions. And part of the impact is you need to understand that because you or maybe you inherited the code from someone else, didn't do this properly, there is a cost to our business of having to go back and re-engineer something. And that's another way, a reason to do it is so they understand why it was broken and how to cure it. Because it's another, in a way, it's another training opportunity. But yes, it does have an impact when you realize someone says, well, I'd love to go off and build this